So today I want to do something a little different. I want to talk about a book I just read. It's called Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. As you can imagine from the title, it's a riff on Scooby-Doo. It also plays with H.P. Lovecraft and the sort of Nancy Drew Hardy Boy mysteries, and even a little bit of supernatural is thrown in there. I've been off books for a while. This one, though, I picked up on a whim. I saw it in the local bookstore, and the title and the cover just struck me. The thing I love about it, though, is that it reminds me of a series of books I read when I was a kid growing up. Scholastic put out this series of Universal Monster books around 1999, 2000, something like that. They were written by Larry Mike Garman, and they dealt with the story of these three teenagers who accidentally, through this very contrived set of circumstances, cut the barrier between fiction and reality and release 6 of the classic Universal monsters into the real world. And then, subsequently, they have to stop them. And that is a very Scooby-Doo-like scenario, kids battling monsters. When I was reading this book, I felt less like I was reading a sequel to Scooby-Doo at times, and more like I was reading a sequel to those books. The story of these 3 friends who used to be very close, reconnecting all these years later, and the fact that hunting monsters and solving mysteries is what brought them together. It reminded me very much of those books, and it took me to a place that I think I needed to go right now. There's a great scene at the end of the book. It doesn't really give anything away, but these characters, they feel like they've been cursed because of something that happened in their past. And they have a confrontation with the main villain, and there's this whole big explanation, and when the subject comes up to them being cursed because they have nightmares, because they're sleepless, because they're tortured and depressed, the main villain, in their explaining of the situation, is like, "You're not cursed, you're just a bunch of mid-20-somethings. That's normal." And it kind of made me laugh, because I know I personally have gone through that. A bunch of my friends have gone through that. So it was something that really struck a chord. And not only that, like, the book had already had my attention. I was already hooked, but that was sort of like the cherry on top that made it all worthwhile. The other thing I really loved about this book was the writing style. Apparently the author, his first language isn't even English, which you would never know by reading it. It's done in his voice is such, it's so casual and so authoritative at the same time. And you can really see it as a movie or a television show playing out in your heads, to the point that sometimes the prose change. You'll be going mid-conversation with 2 characters back and forth, and it'll be like, he said, she said, he said, and then suddenly on the page, the structuring of the book will change, where it will literally be a name with a colon and then their dialogue. It transforms from a novel to a script at random based on the pace of the scene and the argument. So yeah, I keep beating around the bush. The story is about these characters, these 4 kids and their dog, who solved the mystery of the Sleepy Lake monster back in the 70s. We fast forward to the 1990s, and the jock, Peter, who was essentially like the Fred of the group, has killed himself. He went on to become a famous actor because he was so good looking, and then the stress of life got to him and he OD'd. That leaves us with Andy, who is basically a tomboy. She, at first you think maybe she's supposed to be the Daphne role, but there isn't really a Daphne per se. Daphne and Velma are more or less combined into one character named Carrie, who's the brain, but she's also described as being sexy, and Peter in the past had a thing for her. Andy is kind of her own character. She's a tough, no-nonsense, been in the military, in and out of jail, sort of kicks ass and loves doing it. She's an original creation, but she stands in for the sort of Daphne role. Like, if you're looking at the silhouette like they present on the cover, she would be the Daphne. And she's kind of the one who puts all this in motion, because she senses that something went wrong in the past, that maybe they got the wrong guy, or maybe there was something more to the mystery. than just a haunted house and a guy in a rubber suit. Carrie is basically, she would have become a university professor or a college professor had it not been for what happened in her past, kind of like neutering her sense of adventure. When we find her, she's working as a waitress or a bartender, and Andy has to kind of rescue her and take her on this road trip back to the town where they solved all these mysteries. The final character, Nate, who is essentially Shaggy, he's like the little kid brother who was super nerdy and then went insane and got locked in an asylum. And that's when the Lovecraft references really begin, because he's locked in Arkham. He's interesting, and he has a bit of an American Werewolf in London thing going, where he sees Peter's ghost constantly and is talking to him and never acknowledging it with the other characters. And you can never really tell 100% if it's in his head or if it's an actual ghost manifest. I think at the end of the day, it turns out that it is just in his head. But even then, it's still very funny the way they play it off. There's also the dog, Tim. I believe his name is Tim. Yeah, he is essentially a realistic version of Scooby-Doo. Like he's pretty cowardly. He loves food, but he's also like a real dog. He's supportive and loving of his master. He's actually Carrie's dog, not Nate. So again, even though it's obviously a riff on Scooby-Doo, they depart enough with the characters and the relationships that it doesn't feel like a knockoff. It also, it helps it to really breathe as its own thing. And another thing Cantero does is complicate Carrie and Andy's relationship. It's something that's handled very delicately. I think it helps that it takes place in the 90s. But Andy, from very early on, you get the sort of feeling that she has an emotional investment in Carrie. Like, she's definitely in love with her. They never put a label on it, like saying that she's a lesbian or that she's gay. But the only label they do put on it is that she loves her. And it is eventually reciprocated, but it's in a very sort of gray way where Carrie, she's not saying yes, she's not saying no, but she's acknowledging that she has feelings for her too, whether it's as a friend or as something more. It's handled very, very well, and I feel like the build up to the sort of reveal, the confirmation that, oh, this is what's going on between these two characters. I thought it was very satisfying. The last thing I want to mention is that it also subverts a lot of expectations. Like, this book, you read the description, you think it's going to be funny, and it is. Like, there's some moments that are ripped right out of a classic Hanna-Barbera cartoon, especially when they get Nate out of Arkham, where he's locked up. It feels like something like, boom, full-blown, like Looney Tunes. But, it actually gets scary, especially once the monsters come into play, and like the real monsters, not the rubber-suited stuff. And then when you realize the sort of gears in motion, when you get the scope of what's happening, it does, like, Lovecraftian is the word for it. It's very bleak. This is like the world they enter when they go to the town where they solved all these mysteries as kids. It's very, very depressing. You look at it, like, you can see it popping off the page, and like, it is dead streets, gray skies, and not a soul in sight. It's very depressing. It feels like all the color is just bleeding out of the image. But Cantero does this great thing to subvert expectations, where like, he'll set up characters, usually characters who were assholes to Carrie, Andy, and Nate in the past, whether it was a bully that they knew, or the officer who the officer who would never believe them. He sets up these characters who you think from their past who were dicks, and you expect them to be dicks or be a hindrance to what it is they're trying to do here, and then they end up being supportive and helpful, and great, genuine people who are apologetic. It's very, like, it's uplifting. It feels, because the characters are getting drawn into such a bleak world and such a dark story, it's like a glimmer of hope, a ray of sunshine. You really feel like, oh, not everything is black and white. Not everyone is who you thought was bad as a kid is really that bad when you're an adult. You know, sometimes they just didn't know, or sometimes there was a motivation behind their actions. And that was something that was really, I thought, like, it was just cool to see that done. It's like, whenever I see that done in a movie where you think someone's going to be an asshole and they turn out to be good, it's always like a fuck yeah sort of cheer moment. And this was no exception. It was really one of my favorite parts of the book. So yeah, if you're looking for a good spooky story to curl up under the blanket with, this is a good one. And I would even honestly, like, I made a big deal out of appreciating it as an adult, but like the sort of Scooby-Doo gateway that you get with this, I would recommend this to someone like a younger reader or someone in high school, especially because it's very easy to burn through. It's a lot of fun and it just sucks you in. So yeah, Meddling Kids, give it a shot.